Good evening, everyone. Calling to order at 6 o'clock p.m. the meeting of the Board of Education Ad Hoc Inclusion and Educational Justice Committee. With me tonight, I have Board Member Kara Nelson Bakey, Deputy Superintendent Sandra Faois, and I have with us Executive Director of Leadership Development, Miss Allison Brehe Johnson. I hope I pronounced everyone's name correctly.
You did, thank you.
First item on the agenda will be an overview of the Ad Hoc Inclusion and Educational Justice Committee. And Allison, if you would introduce yourself and give us a little background since you're going to be taking over um, leading this committee.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Allison Breede Johnson. I am the Executive Director of Leadership Development. So I work with support and supervise principals in our district. I have been with the district now for about 6 months. And I previously was a deputy superintendent in the CUNY Urban Assembly district in New York City. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm looking forward to working with the committee and supporting this great, important work that we are doing to ensure that all of our students in Norwalk have an equitable education. And
Thank
so,
you, Allison.
thank you. Roland, do you want to pull up the slide?
Everybody see it?
Yes. You can move to the next one. So welcome, everyone. Since this is the first meeting that we've had in quite some time, we decided that we would spend this evening sort of doing a recap of what the ad hoc committee has done up until this point. And then we will talk about some of the next steps for our committee and really thinking about how we would like to move forward with this work. Next slide. So in our district, Norwalk Public Schools, we are really committed to providing an excellent and equitable education to all of our students to really ensure that all of our students are future ready and really prepared to thrive in the 21st century world. Next slide, Roland. Everything that we do in our work is really grounded in our 5 strategic priorities, which is ensuring all of our students are future ready, ensuring that all of our students have equitable opportunities and learning experiences, that our students receive an excellent education and high quality instruction, and that we are ensuring the engagement of all of our children, families, and community members. Next slide. Next slide, Roland. And so what we'll really begin this meeting with doing is having a recap of the work that previously happened through this committee. So the work began with a study that was conducted by Dr. Fergus through the Rutgers organization. And in that study, he really provided us with data around disproportionality in our district. And so the committee began by reviewing the disproportionality data. And from that, equity teams were developed in all of our schools that were really designed to address the individual disproportionalities in individual schools. And some of the disproportionalities that we were looking at was grounded in students who had access to gifted and talented programs, honors and AP courses, special education services, as well as looking at suspension data and the population of students who were affected most by suspensions. In addition to that, equity teams in schools all create equity goals to address the disproportionalities in their school and their school improvement plans. And that is something that has been in the works for the last 3 or 4 years. Each school also has an equity ambassador that meets with the Equity Institute on a monthly basis and receives professional learning that's really designed to shift the mindsets of members of our community around microaggressions, around equity and what it really is, around racism and things of that nature. And our equity ambassadors then turnkey that information back to their school communities. Next slide, Roland. The other thing that the committee spent some time on.
Allison, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do notice that board member Howard White just joined, and I didn't know if we wanted to acknowledge.
Hi,
Good evening, guys.
Good
Okay,
evening.
thank you for joining
Hi,
us.
Howard.
Mhm.
Thanks for joining us.
Sorry,
No,
I
don't
didn't
be
have
sorry.
this fight. Didn't have this fight. So thank you.
Okay, no, it's okay. I don't know if while reading Allison is able to see everybody. That's why I interrupted. So thank you, Allison. I apologize.
That's okay, thank you. So the former deputy superintendent, Dr. Thomas McBride, he established a grading for equity committee that was comprised of various stakeholders, principals, teachers, social workers, counselors, central office staff. And they conducted a 8-month-long book study around grading for equity. And in the book is really grounded in 3 of the pillars that you see on the screen around ensuring that student grades are accurate. So making sure that the calculations are mathematically sound and really grounded in a student's level of academic performance. And it's easy for students to understand. The second pillar is bias resistance, so making sure that grades are based on valid evidence of content knowledge and not on a teacher's implicit bias or their environment. And the third pillar that the grading for equity is grounded in is embedding grading practices that achieve and support a growth mindset. So really providing students with multiple opportunities to master the content and skills, and really ensuring that grading is based on their academic success versus soft skills. So many of us know, just through school experiences, that if a student raised their hand or participated in class, you got credit for that, or you received extra credit for doing an additional assignment with homework. If, as long as you hand in your homework, you get credit for it, despite, how you may have performed on it. But in those instances, the grade doesn't truly reflect what the student knows and is able to do. And so in this book, it really discusses ways in which to accurately grade students and ensuring that they have multiple opportunities to master the content. Next slide, please. And so from the book study, there were 6 recommendations that came out of the book study to improve grading practices in the district. One of them was allowing retakes and redos. So this provides students, again, multiple opportunities to master the content and skills. So if a student doesn't perform well on an assessment, they have the opportunity to retake the assessment for a higher grade within a specific period of time. So it's a similar idea as if you were to take a driving test and you were to fail the first time, you have an opportunity to retake it. If you think about SATs, if you don't get the score that you desire, you have an opportunity to go back, study, and retake the assessment. So it's the same premise in schools. The second recommendation was using rubrics to establish a clear and detailed grading criteria that holds both students and teachers accountable. So oftentimes, if there's not a rubric and not a clear assessment criteria, students don't actually understand what it is that they need to do in order to be successful on an assessment. But by having a rubric that communicates this detailed grading criteria, students understand what it is that they have to produce in order to show that they are meeting the standard. And it holds teachers accountable to grading students based on that criteria. The third recommendation was homework. So this premise that homework is not to be graded, but it's really used as practice and preparation for work to come in the future. If you think about sports, students have an opportunity to practice and prepare before an actual competitive game. And so really shifting the mindset around homework from a piece of compliance and more about practice and preparation. Moving towards more project-based learning. So thinking about tasks in which students have to take their learning and skills and apply it to a new or novel situation so that they're not just memorizing information and repeating information, but they're actually taking the learning and the skills and applying it to a real world context experience. The fifth recommendation was establishing a minimum grade of 50. And so I don't know if you have heard of the case of the zero, but the case of the zero really talks about when students receive a zero grade, it really takes a lot to be able to come back from that grade. So even if a student has demonstrated that they have met the standards for the course, they may never be able to actually pass the course because again, it's so hard to mathematically come back from a zero. And so with the minimum grade of a 50 is a failing grade, but it gives students an opportunity to recover from the failure and redeem themselves, as opposed to trying to come back from a zero. Because if you have a zero, if you get 100, then you land at a 50 and you're still not passing, right? And then the sixth recommendation was taking a more standards-based approach. So grades are based on the mastery of the content and skills from the standards, and not based on things like extra credit or whether you handed your work in on time or whether you are participating in class or your effort, but is based more on a student's understanding of the state standards. I want to stop there for a second to see if anyone has any questions.
So Allison, I do have a question, and you might be getting to this in a later slide. Like where are we in terms of rolling out grading for equity to our district?
So we're gonna go into that in our next.
Okay, I'm jumping the gun here.
No,
Sorry.
it's okay. It's okay. Where you're new to the committee as well, do you have any questions about what's happened thus far?
I am not new to the committee.
No, I was saying Howard.
Oh, Howard. Yes, sure.
Well, no, I am new to it. I did read up on it, so at this point in time, I don't have really any major questions to what's going on. So what you're discussing and going on, I do appreciate it, but overall, I have no questions right now, really.
Okay, thank you. So why don't we move to the next slide, Roland? Next slide. So in terms of thinking about next steps, where we have some new members to the committee, so both Ms. Fayos as the new deputy superintendent and myself on the committee, and Howard. What we have decided to do was first we wanted to sort of take a step back in order to move forward, because in rolling out this very important work, it's really important that all stakeholders have a very clear understanding of what this work is and what it means and why this work is so important. And it is really important that there is buy-in so that this work is rolled out with fidelity and has the intended impact that we want it to have. And so one of our immediate next steps is Deputy Superintendent Fayos and myself, we have a meeting with the author of the book, Joe Feldman, to really discuss and implement strategy that really aligns with the needs of our district in terms of, rolling out something like this. And typically, what they do is they have kickoff events that really explain the book and really explain why this work is important. They have worked with several districts throughout the country. So they're able to share how this was rolled out and what the impact, they have specific data of the impact that it's had on student performance, because that's ultimately what the intended outcome of this is that students are actually mastering the standards and have multiple opportunities to do so, which then results in students having a higher GPA and failing less classes. And they also provide professional learning and continuous support to teachers. So they do have like coaching available where they're able to coach individual teachers as well as additional professional learning sessions. So we have a meeting with Mr. Feldman next week, May 6th, in which we will talk with him about how he may be able to support us in a rollout of this work and really support our school leaders and teachers in the rollout of this.
May I add a little bit of context to that?
Sure.
So some of in us engaging with the high school principals around their own knowledge about the grading for equity work, we also started to notice a varying degree of just sort of not just comfort with discussing it and rolling it out, but also just varying knowledge of what it actually was. So I did feel that in us taking on this role, it having before lived with Dr. McBride, that a reset to make sure that everybody actually has the tools to be able to have these conversations with their teachers and be confident in having and implementing this work was necessary. And even when visiting schools, there were various degrees of how many people knew what the grading for equity was. We did do a little bit of level setting around using the correct language when discussing the minimum grading. So we've had a few of those meetings already just to level set everyone. But we are going to be talking to somebody who has done some implementation with districts to be able to give us some actual models of that we can follow and give the schools a model that they can follow and also give them choice, because I think that one of the things that I was able to learn from Allison Brady Johnson is in the district she came from, principals had some autonomy. Everybody was doing the work, but the way that they were actually implementing it could look different and we could still achieve the same outcome because the outcome is really what was important. So that was the reason also for us to take a step back in order to be able to move forward.
And
So-
every school's readiness is in a different place. And so some schools may be able to move forward rather quickly where
Yeah.
others may not be prepared. And we just want to make sure that the rollout of this is successful, and has the intended impact.
And the part about engaging various stakeholder groups, it's also like, what are we doing for our families to make sure that if we're going to be moving forward, not if, but we're going to be moving forward with this work, how are we engaging our families so that they also understand the implications of this to their students and what it means for their high schooler? So there was also that piece that we definitely want to figure out and get Mr. Feldman's input on that type of work also. And then this committee also.
So let me ask you a question. So by the time we do all of the basic things here, we've got to do the engagement, have it go before the grading committee and also the policy committee. Based on your experience, how long do you think it would take for us to roll out something like this? And would it be the intent to pilot it in a school, one or two schools, before implementing it district-wide, if we were in fact going to do this?
Yeah, so I think like just in thinking back, just so you know, as a former principal, this was something that I rolled out in my own school. And I was a member of the principal steering committee in my district for this before moving to the district level. And so one of the things that we did was, this is a multi-year process. So it's not something, even though we go, we bring this to policy to have this enacted in our schools, it's, to your point, Sherry, we would want to pilot this. And so part of, our next step is really reestablishing a grading for equity team that encompasses all of the various stakeholders, including parents and students, because we want everyone's voice to be heard, and we want them to be a part of creating this implementation plan, again, so that there is buy-in. And so, yes, I think it does make sense to pilot it. In my own school, I didn't even roll it out school-wide in the first year. So in the first year, what I did was identified a group of teachers that bought into the work, was willing to be the leaders of this work, and they created a team. And they were supported by Joe Feldman and his team. So they went to, bi-monthly professional learning sessions. They received coaching support virtually from a coach in terms of how to plan for this type of instruction in the classroom and how to structure, how do you build in a redo? How do you make sure that you have a rubric that communicates the assessment criteria, and how they can be successful on it. So in that first year, that group of teachers was able to test out many of these things, right? And if they, were not successful in the first try, they were able to make adjustments to it. And with that, we were also able to track the impact on student learning. So we, by the end of the school year, once that group of teachers lived through it, they then rolled it out to the remainder of the school. And they were able to share specific practices that they had implemented in their classrooms, how they did it with specific examples, as well as showing samples of student work. So showing like the first assessment they may have taken, perhaps the support the student received in between, and then the sample of student work once they completed the redo, and was able to really show how the student improved over time. And so with that, it really helps to get buy-in when teachers hear from other teachers with specific examples, with the student data to show the impact. It really builds buy-in in that way. Yes, Howard.
That's
One thing I can tell you guys, that is as far as the grading for equity is Stanford's been they implemented this already, and it's been very successful. And you can see the dramatic change in the students. I've been working in the city of Stanford for many years, and I work with the students in the alternative school, and the turnaround and the plus that these kids benefit from it truly helps, because one of the key things that you talked about earlier was there's no comeback from a zero. And that is actually true, because the majority of our students were saying that there's no choice and there's no chances for them to be successful. So what they basically were doing in the past, you were seeing these students not participate. You were seeing them showing up and going. You will see them not doing the things that they need to do because of the simple fact that the zero equals to them. There's no way they can come back from it. But overall, the involvement that I see these teachers involved with in Stanford, and the involvement from the students overall, is a big success. So I just really think this is going to be a great thing for the city of Norwalk as well, and for our students in general. And this is something that's going to be a plus, because now these students going to see that, oh, they do care. They're just not, failing us. They're giving us a chance to make up whatever needs to be made up. They're giving us a chance for us to be successful. So I'm very familiar with it, and I see it as a plus, and I'm excited that we're looking to implement this as well.
Thank you for sharing that, because perhaps we can also reach out to Stanford to see what their implementation plan was, and learn from their experience. So thank you.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Were you going to say something, Sherry?
No,
Oh, you muted, Sherry.
I look forward to hearing the results of your meeting with
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Feldman when we get together the next. I have a hard stop at 6:30. I've got to go to
That's
another
okay.
meeting.
No, this was our,
So
we
yes.
kept the agenda to 6:30, so.
Yes, perfect. So does anyone have any other questions or concerns? I would like to someone to make a motion to adjourn if we can.
Motion?
Okay. So we are adjourning our meeting at 6:30, right on time. Thank you, Allison and Sandra, for your information. And again, look forward to our next meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
All right.
Have a good
Bye
night.
now. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.